Good morning, Job day 8. So today we meet a new figure in the book of Job, a young man named Elihu. And Elihu explains himself as he begins to speak that he had waited for the three friends of Job to exhaust their arguments, which they have now done. They have nothing else to say. He had waited for Job also to finish his final discourse, his last parting words. And he had waited for all this to finish because he was respectful towards those who were older than him. But he says, all of this talk, the errors being made by the three friends, and the words that were too strongly put by Job himself, which we'll get into this morning, all of this was like wine maturing in a wineskin and ready to burst, and he couldn't hold it in anymore. And so he says, I have something to say. I know I'm younger than you all, but it's not always the case that old men are wiser than young men. And I want to defend God. And this is Elihu's great concern, the reputation of God, the name of God, the glory of God in all of this, which is something which has not been done justice by either of Job's three friends or Job himself, but it is with Job himself that Elihu actually takes issue. And what we are going to comment on today about that reminded me of something that happened in the last week. A very good friend of mine's sister, who was living on a farm in, I think, the Kokstad area. They've been married for a couple of years, got a daughter who's about 2 years old, and she is pregnant with their second child. And her husband was tragically killed on the farm in the last couple of weeks. He was burnt in a fire. And my friend, after the funeral, sent me the YouTube video where they'd live streamed the funeral for people to partake in it. And I watched, first of all, her late husband's father, who was broken, speak. And I heard the preacher's message, which was brilliant. And then I heard his wife, her name is Rachel. I heard Rachel speak. And in all three cases, the father, the preacher, and then Rachel herself, who has now lost her husband with one young child and baby to be in the womb, and all three of them, it was quite humbling, quite remarkable how they spoke about the goodness of God. It was heartbreaking to see them in their pain and fighting back tears as they spoke, but in all that, they did not charge God with wrong. And Rachel spoke about how the week before her husband died, he had been dancing in the kitchen with their little girl and singing what struck her at the time to be a strange old hymn about how they would dance together on streets of gold in heaven. And she told the story in her little speech about Lazarus coming out of the grave and the grave clothes being taken off of him. And she said she'd had a picture of that, of her husband coming out of all of the wrapping that they put on him when they got him to hospital, and that she knows that one day she will be with him again, and that he is now free, and that he is where we all want to be. And that God is good, and that God has comforted them in the days past, and that he has given them many graces and mercies. And though it's painful, they trust him in it all. Now, none of us who have been through something like that, who've never been through that, can say, well, that's what I would do in that situation. We can only pray, Lord, lead us not into temptation. Lord, do not lead us into hard testing like that, Lord. But if it were to be that I would have faced something so traumatic in my life, God give me grace that I would not charge you with wrong. And this is, of course, what Job had begun to slip into as he made more and more of his speeches and poured out his heart. He had begun to paint God as a cruel God, that God was wronging him because his conscience was clear. And yet why was God letting him suffer? God was his enemy, he said at one point. And it is this that Elihu takes issue with. And so these are part of the words of Elihu this morning. He says, "Therefore listen to me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God to do wickedness, and from the Almighty to commit iniquity. For he repays man according to his work, and makes man to find a reward according to his way. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice." Who gave him charge over the earth? Or who appointed him over the whole world? So Elihu is saying, God's ways are not our ways. And he never does wrong. So let me read the short little comment I made in my notebook this morning. Job's friends said that Job was wicked. That was their error. But Job said that God was cruel and unfair. This was his error. Elihu now charges Job with his real problem. God is never cruel. He is only loving and kind. And when we suffer in this life, we must defer to the justice, goodness, and mysterious sovereignty of God, and that in it all he intends it for our good in the end. And we are to never charge God with wrong as Job did. Well, may God give us grace. I'll see you tomorrow.